Hello and welcome to Altitude, everyone. I'm your host, Woody Woodworth. Extra special guest today. Super excited. Today, we're going to talk to Justin Payne. Justin is a senior infrastructure security architect at Mueller Water, to be formal, Mueller Water Products. And as I was doing research for this podcast, I found out that they are a huge company. And in fact, they're one of the largest manufacturers and distributors of fire hydrants, gate valves, and critical water infrastructure for all of North America. So really important, cool company. Justin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Woody.
Absolutely. So we have a lot to talk about today. I know when you and I chatted earlier as we were getting ready for the episode, we talked a lot about your journey into cloud and kind of the before and after. I think this is a great opportunity to take that discussion further insofar as Mueller Water Products, like a lot of big utility companies, represents kind of a perfect example, a company that really knew nothing about cloud, say what, maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yep.
And then you have helped that company evolve now into this digital transformation play. Of course, there may have been some bumps in the road, but I really want to dig into what that was like for you, for your company, but also how the cloud has really changed the way your company works and operates. So that's a fantastic avenue of discussion. And since you're a security architect, of course, I'm sure we'll weave that discussion in as well. So how long have you been with the company?
So I've been at Mueller for 10 years. I've been in IT for roughly 30 years. So a third of my career has been here at Mueller. Before that, I was bouncing around doing the infrastructure, server, networking type of career. So when I got here at Mueller, it was right after the 2008, 2009 kind of the downfall of housing, and they'd done all the foreclosures. And housing is big at Mueller, shows water. You know, when you start to put subdivisions and things like in, you need water infrastructure. So that's really where we get a lot of our revenue from. So because of the financial downturn during that period, when I got here in early 2013, everything was old. It was outdated. Hardware was 7, 10 years old. You know, resources couldn't keep up with where they was. So absolutely. So over that past 10 years, we started updating on premise, but then as the cloud really started to become more of a sector for our manufacturing, type industry, we started really looking at, okay, what can we do? We'd already had Office.com, some little Azure, but AWS was really where we started to look to put all of our eggs in that basket as far as our OT and things like that.
So great. You've been around long enough to know where all the bodies are buried. So that's a good thing. So I'm just going to ask
Yep.
all kinds of cool questions, shoot from the hip, and I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to the answers. So how did the conversation about cloud migration start for your company? Was it the competition and other businesses in our sector are moving, so we need to go with the herd to make sure that we're not left behind? Was it an analysis of what the cloud could bring to your business and you thought kind of independently of the market, this is what we need to do to deliver the best products and services? Or was it a combination of those things?
It was probably a combination of those things. You know, you got to kind of think of where we was, a 150-year-old company. Everything was old. It was built on physical boxes. We'd kind of, virtualized a lot of that over that past 5 or 6 years that I'd been here, but we were still running OT, like meters and collectors and hubs, and that back end process is all on heavy equipment, big servers, things like that. And then we would do the old traditional, NAT it out, you NAT your ports out through a firewall so somebody could access them type thing. And you had very, older type technology there. And so when we started looking at where we was and where the industry was going, Mueller knew they had to transition from being just a fire hydrant. We owned, I think at that point, 80-something% of the market of fire hydrants and things like that. So it was like, okay, if we're really going to be in this space moving forward, we've got to be agile. We've got to be able to really move at a quicker pace and spinning up a virtual machine, installing IS and installing, .NET type programs on there. It was really just kind of a hard process. So that's where it really become. We started looking to say, okay, where do we need to go? AWS was our cloud of choice. Now, nobody had AWS experience in our company, really. So they started hiring developers and coders and firmware people that were kind of around that process. And then I kind of got handed the security infrastructure, setting up everything in AWS so that then they could use that as their playground as we begin. So it was really just a process of, hey, how can we do this quickly to really start getting ahead because we were behind, and AWS provided us the most simple and quick solution for that.
So here you are working at the helm of the security architecture division of a 150-year-old company that's done real traditional blue chip business, right? Making water meters, fire hydrants, just tangible, critical stuff through, I'm sure, traditional manufacturing mechanisms. As you mentioned, the whole back end
Yep.
was on metal. The call goes to cloud, probably from the executive tier. So when that call goes out, who laid down the tracks at your company and said, over my dead body, and what happened to them?
Was yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What happened was those kind of sectors kind of took care of themselves because as part of that process, Mueller was transitioning internally. They closed some segments of the business. They kind of consolidated everything from our corporate headquarters. So they kind of started fresh at that point. Now
Mhm.
we still had the old systems, and unfortunately, the people that knew the systems left, and then that becomes its own obstacle, which is not really a cloud thing, but it's the ability to lose all that experience.
Part of that whole journey. Like, yeah, you're not unique there where the new guard comes in, the new developers, the new kids, and the old guard gets a whiff of
Yep.
that and says,
Yep.
you know what? I think I'm going to go find another pasture to occupy.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Woody. We still today have people that are like, I'm not touching the cloud at all, in IT or different segments, because there's a stigma to it, or a lack of control, or in IT you get beat up a lot when things are down. Well, sometimes it's not your problem in the cloud, and you don't have a throat to choke in that instance, So it's like, and they come to us still. So there are still those people that won't touch it. I I wasn't real keen on going to the cloud. I didn't know it, but because I always never shied away from a battle, or I liked the experience, I was like, okay, I'll take on that side. And really, what happened was, first thing I asked them was there a budget? And we'll talk about this in a few minutes. And they're like, no, we just got to get there. And I was like, do you know how much the thing's going to cost? And there was, the executives always think things are cheaper in the cloud. So I was like, okay, I don't know enough to even tell you at that point. I said, I can tell you what I think I know, which is it's not going to be cheaper in the end if you don't do it right and do it around certain aspects of things. So we really just got in there and started the process. And unfortunately, we was immature with how we started. So now we're having to clean up a little bit and move forward. But it was really just create an account, start working our way, talk to AWS a little bit, and really pull in our good security. So we did do good security and infrastructure at the start, but a lot of the actual front end type stuff was a big challenge of how to utilize AWS versus bare metal type systems.
Right. Yeah, that knowledge gap, skills gap is of course super common for any company first beginning their journey to cloud. And that learning curve can be really steep. And through that you can shed some talent, you can gain some talent. You're definitely gonna learn the hard way. I mean, the customers I work with over the years, none of them ever anticipated some of the challenges they hit, but after they got over those big obstacles, they were very happy with the end result. But the process was choppy, and I think people assumed that there was going to be an easy button. So, as we know, on the infrastructure side, security side, there is no easy button. What was it like for you to go through that learning curve? How did you bring yourself up to speed on cloud? Did you self-educate? Did you bring in consultants? Did you just try again? What happened?
Well, that is so. Yeah, so I always do things the hard way, I think. So I still had all my own premise stuff that I had to secure. So the cloud was more of it really was, while it was a goal and a mission at that time, and it has transitioned. The viewpoint has transitioned drastically. But at that point, it was no on-premise type stuff from a internal thing. It was more of the customer-facing stuff they wanted out there. So I still had the day-to-day securing our environment, 20-something sites, and all these devices, all these users. So I had that, and then on my off time, literally, I would work 5 or 6 extra hours a day doing the AWS side. And yes, you talked about the easy button. The hard part of this whole process was that because people didn't know the work that goes into it, they thought it should be done a lot faster. It was like, okay, this thing could be done in a week, and I'm like, no, if we're going to build this right, it's going to take time. So I started doing a lot of research, a lot of reading. I like to get there and hack, so I built that account so many times probably at the start and destroyed it that I didn't know. When I started, it was the documentation. AWS wanted you to use everything that's theirs, so they come in and just like, hey, you don't need to do your own firewalling for east to west traffic, or you don't need to worry about this. AWS has everything. You don't worry about logging. AWS has CloudTrail or whatever it might be. And as I quickly learned that AWS really wanted to sell their services and not necessarily put the best foot forward in some of those areas. So I was the one. I like to really make sure I do it right. So we brought in our own systems to a point. We used AWS where it was practical, but when we started using some of AWS's stuff and some other tools, we started quickly noticing that there was some issues with speed or being able to scale and do some things just because we were locked in one way or another. So that's where we started looking at Aviatrix and different products to kind of supplement that. But yes, it was a lot of Googling, a lot of YouTube, a lot of I did a couple posts on Reddit. Please help me. I've got 2 days to finish this. How to do how to get this transit working, or how do I map this out through a source NAT. And it was stressful, but it took me about a year to really get comfortable where I was able to really wrap up and do what I want to do. But it was a lot of off time because Mueller, while they wanted it, they didn't want me to lose my regular time.
Did you feel like you got sold, not like a lemon car, but that, the promise and the expectation of what it would be was way out of proportion against what it was from AWS or any CSP? I'm not trying to single them out. I would say
Yeah,
that the way
yeah,
they approach,
yeah, no, yeah.
their messaging and marketing is just going to be ubiquitous across the industry. But I'm going to bet they said, this is going to be really easy or straightforward. Use all of our stuff. It's the cure for world hunger. And then you get in there and you realize. So what were some of the things you quickly realized were not working the right way?
When we started looking at this, and I got that call and said, "Hey, we're with AWS, and we want you to do the setup and all the infrastructure type stuff to get ready for them." I went down and I met with basically the engineering directors and the developers, and they were all new hires, probably been there less than 2 months. AWS brought a team, I think, of 7 people in. It was me, 7 AWS people, and a handful of Mueller new people. And I was the one that was pushing to do it right in my eyes, which was, hey, I want to see traffic. I want to be able to control traffic. I want to be able to secure the traffic. And AWS was there saying, hey, we've got a service. You don't have to worry about that. And literally, it was me arguing against my own people at Mueller and AWS. And, they were like, well, AWS says this. We can do this for nothing, or we can do it for just pennies on the dollar. And I'd already went into that meeting with a lot of research. I knew in my head what I wanted to do. I talked to, some of the providers we use, like Palo Alto, things like that. So I really knew kind of what I wanted to do from that aspect. I talked to some people that had done it before, and thankfully they needed my input and my help. So they give me the approval to move forward. But yes, so quickly what I got in there and realized was that, back then, at least when we started, AWS has copied a lot of technology from a lot of vendors, so they're further up now. So when I say this, people are going to say, "Oh, that technology's there." It wasn't there when I started, but just the simple thing to see east to west traffic or VPC peering, things like that, just wasn't there. So we were having because we wanted to have staging and dev and QA accounts and have some granular things there where we could bring in contractors and consultants to work in a limited. Because you got to think a lot of our customers are utilities. So that data is very sensitive. That data is very controlled, because the last thing we want is somebody getting in there and shutting off water system, water for 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people. So we really want to control those environments. And so I quickly got in there and realized that what they wrote on paper and in AWS documentation, either it didn't really fly when you got practical, or there was a lot of limitations. You could do it, but you could only do it to this point, or you could only have so many of these, whether it be anything from like a load balancer number or IPs or elastic IPs, things like that. There were a lot of limitations that we had to work through, and some of that evolved through bringing on products like Aviatrix and Palo Alto to do some of that.
Sure. I want to go back a little bit and talk about costs, because you had mentioned that was another one of those things that was blown out of proportion in terms of the expectation of what cloud could do for your business. Now, everyone I've talked to has a similar story, which is that the initial idea of going to cloud was to be innovative, to be faster, and to save money. And tends to be if you want to save money in cloud, you have to give up a lot of control and visibility and functionality, right? So that's why you are bringing in Aviatrix,
Right.
you are bringing in Palo Alto, you're bringing in all these independent software vendor, third-party systems to give you that control and visibility that you needed. But then if you don't scale the right way, cost can go up. And in fact, some people argue that cloud has never been about cost. There's a whole, movement going online now about pull the plug on cloud, go back to on-prem, and people saying, I build
Right.
converged infrastructure and it's 200 servers and I'm saving 4 million a year or something to this effect. And so they've turned their nose up
Yep.
at the idea that cloud is actually beneficial to them. What is your experience there? Is it worth it? And what are you doing to help control costs?
Great questions. Great questions. So let me step back a little bit too. So I would almost want to say, at least in my experience over the years, was that cloud cost was sold to executives so that leadership could get into cloud. They would tell leadership, "Hey, it's going to be cheaper." And leadership, that's all they want to hear. So they'll give a blank check. Hey, go for it. If it's going to cost us less in the long run, go for it. What that just gets it going, and then the reality sets in. So what happened with us was because we had new hires, we had new people that maybe didn't understand the complete product as well from a coding standpoint. They literally just lifted and shifted a lot of those bare metals into EC2 instances.
Mhm.
That was the quickest way. It was the fastest way to get to quote unquote cloud. Now at that point, really all we was using somebody else's data center. We weren't using it as pure cloud. That cost quickly escalated, and that's where when you start running, large number of EC2 instances, large number of data, storage, things like that, ingress, egress costs, and things like that, you quickly go up. So we were immature in that aspect, and we just didn't have the knowledge to rewrite those at that point. So moved it all over, and then all of a sudden the cost went up, and then cost becomes a factor. I thought you said cost was going to be cheaper. I thought you were going to be better. So then what happens is we start that process of maturing, just like anybody. When you're young, teenager, when I was growing up, is all about how fast I could do something, how quick I could do it better than somebody, and get out there. As I've matured, it's not always the hare that wins the race; it's sometimes that tortoise. So we're now more mature and like, okay, now that we've got it out there, how do we start changing those bare metal type products that run on IS or services that are more expensive? Doing Windows licensing is very expensive in AWS, but you can transpose that over to a AWS service and save it. We API gateways were new to us. All those type of things. So
Mhm.
now as we've progressed, we really have started rewriting a lot of our older processes that are still valid into more of a service base, which is saving money. But then also as we develop new products, we're developing them the right way from the start, and that is starting to mitigate some of that cost. But to your point, I don't know if it'll ever be cheaper than doing on-prem, per se, because if you do it right, you can scale pretty big. But it has definitely given us a more agile, a more feature set. Those things that AWS offers, you can't really do on-prem unless you're AWS because of the money to put that infrastructure into place at a start. So definitely done better in that sense. Now, we have also now moved more to a cloud first for on premise, where it makes sense too. So over those years, the value of not having a data center internally, some of that value is seen. Okay, if we move everything to the cloud, then it's different money and it's a different way to look at it. So we have started transitioning some of those servers that we've used over there to AWS as well.
Yeah, that is a really common story among a lot of businesses that migrate to cloud. The beginning with the lift and shift, the sticker price goes up because none of the applications are refactored for cloud. They're not taking advantage of, the agile, more managed PaaS services. And then as you gain maturity, you begin to refactor and you begin to recoup cost and hit your stride. The foil to that, though, is that the more you get indoctrinated into managed services and agile things, the more control you lose and the more visibility
Yep.
you lose. So you kind of have to maybe change expectations among some people, application owners, about how well you can support their application or the kind of security you can provide.
Yep. Absolutely. And not only that, Woody, is what happens at least from where I look at it, is, as we said before, that old guard leaves, but a lot of companies are now bringing in contractors and consultants to do this because they know the AWS. And then what happens is it gets too expensive. They can't keep up that hourly rate. They migrate out. Perfect example is, we do some database and development, things like that for our stuff. Well, a lot of that, is contracted out at times. And then when that contract gets finished or gets too expensive or downturned in business, contractors are the first to go. Well, that knowledge is not always transferred to how to
Mm,
run it. So then you have to kind of dig into that. So that cost is not even associated because it's kind of a fake labor cost in my perspective. It's like, oh, we got this done. We didn't hire somebody. Well, you got them done off of a capital project or off of something like that, and then you can't keep that going. So what I do find is we do have a lot of knowledge gaps at times in those areas, not about our products, but more about the AWS side because they'll outsource that in to quickly knock that out. Somebody that knows a SageMaker or knows RDS or knows QuickSight or some of those AWS services. And then once they get it set up and stamp it, it's all good. They go. But it's an ongoing continuous maintenance that you have to do. You can't afford the $300 or $400 an hour for a contractor to sit there and do that.
absolutely. Yeah, there's the cost of the service, and then there's the cost of the brain drain, right? Which is if you don't have
That's good. Yep.
either the right tools or talent to maintain your cloud and operate it moving forward, then that hidden cost rears
Yep.
its ugly head. There's a lot to say, I think, about platforms that help customers help themselves, insofar as if you can use a lot of automation and abstraction to take the complexity out of operating and managing the cloud, it helps people do more with less, right?
I think you have to in the cloud, and that was a big shift for us. When we were running on prem, there was very little automation in that sense. Now that we're cloud, that has to be a step first because
Yeah.
you need to be able to repeat it. You need to be able to transfer that over. But then the people write that automation. Whoever takes it over after that person who wrote it has to understand what it does.
Yeah.
Or what happens is they click a button and don't do what they want to do, and they get frustrated or make a mistake.
Let's talk more about security now. What is it like to be in charge of the security ecosystem for, I don't know how many meters and sensors you guys have, probably hundreds of thousands that feed into cloud? How did you go about developing a plan to secure them? And did you find that the tools that cloud gave you were adequate for this?
Boy, that was a big thing. So I get a lot of anxiety when I think about cloud security because when you are doing security for an on-premise, just your traditional data center type environment, it's very controlled. You have a badge, you scan to get into that room. Nobody gets to touch that equipment. Nobody can power it off. Nobody can do those things. And all that was very well controlled, and you can imagine, manufacturing companies have been around mature like us. It's very limited who has access to do those type of things. Now, fast forward to security in the cloud, it's a little bit like the Wild Wild West. You got automation that has elevated permissions. You have people that get hired that really don't know AWS or don't know cloud and don't know security for sure. Don't know. They're given more permissions and rights than what they should because they have to work the whole process. DevOps now is, in IT, I'm an old school. Like I only give you exactly what you want, and then I make you scream and cry for it to get that. DevOps is kind of a whole new process, at least for in my mind, because now that dev operations person has pretty much access to spin up a machine, expose that machine, do what has to do through that life cycle. And so I had to make sure that not only now is my edge from a NAT or a gateway type secure. Now we've got APIs and it's got to be secure. We've got hard drive images, EBSs and stuff floating out there, that anybody can mount if done wrong. Or, you got all these environments that you got to look for. So it definitely changed the infrastructure of how we do things. And what we really did was from the start, we said, hey, we want to see every bit of our east-west traffic. So we put that in place. We wanted a good backbone of not just relying on AWS infrastructure type stuff like VPC peering or things like that. We wanted a system that allowed us to quickly add multiple accounts, bridge that into a really fast backbone off of AWS. And that's why we went with Aviatrix. It was really a godsend. When I first designed it, we did the traditional VPC transit, which was like an IPsec transit. So we had like a firewall. Each account was tied through a VPN into that firewall. it had a lot of limitations. It was, 700 and something. I think it was, megabits, a second or whatever it was. It was we would top those out when you start pulling over the again. And so we had a lot of limitations, and ping times were up, and a lot of that older software was very sensitive. So not only was I having to deal with security, I was having to learn AWS infrastructure as well, and like, how do I get it faster in the cloud? On-prem, I know I can put me a 10 gig backbone, buy me a couple Cisco switches, run my cable, and make sure my NICs are up to speed. I do pretty well. In the cloud, you've got all these variables, you've got all these things you've got to be able to tie together. So not only was we working on security, was also having to build infrastructure the right way too, so that all these accounts could talk quickly. As far as security, what we kind of started was just the basic. I want to make sure I know all my traffic flowing, be able to isolate and stop, maybe this account from talking to that account, or that VPC talking to this, or that machine even talking to this machine. And really just started it at a pure allow zero trust environment. And then we started building our IAM in a granular fashion. And what we do actually, I'm sure, Mueller people probably see this. I'm not the most popular person sometimes because we don't allow anyone to expose anything in AWS unless they go through our security. So we look through every bit that gets exposed, and we try to run as much through like Verizon or AT&T or those type of things that our collectors will use. We try to run those in a IPsec into our AWS environment where we can to keep them off the public traffic. But we do have a number of things that can't run that way. But when we do have to expose something, we do really take a very secure and sensitive approach. It has to run through a pretty good process on ours to get exposed.
Kind of like you said earlier, I mean, it's easy to knock the cloud service providers because they've gained a tremendous amount of capability and maturity. But looking 5 years ago, this idea of IoT over the internet was so bright and shiny. And hey, just spin up an IoT listener, point your devices to it. It's going to be safe. It's encrypted. It will use the internet. It will hit our global edge quickly. And then you're one and done. Just let everything be public. Don't worry about private networks. The application will provide the necessary security and the permissions. Hindsight being what it is, that architecture really did not resonate with a lot of the energy and utility companies I worked with. I mean, first of all, the promise that the application was going to be secure was not true because, to your point,
Yep. Yep.
you have to give a lot of elevated permissions to DevOps people. Probably the biggest area of attack would be a wrong permission or a compromised permission getting into that application and mining data or implanting malware and then controlling sensors.
Yep.
And then the idea that the internet is a trusted conduit was a hard pill for a lot of businesses to swallow. So what they ended up doing is what you talked about, which is backhauling it through private networks and then bringing it in via VPN and so forth. Was it that just you were concerned about the fact that there were too many eyes on the internet, and even though you had TLS, maybe these ciphers just weren't strong enough and the certificates weren't trustworthy enough? Or was it that the performance of the internet was just not reliable enough? Or was it just that the path that the internet would take is kind of like a roll of the dice, right? It's a best effort network. You don't have any guarantees on reliability or service like you do with MPLS, and that was hard. So in terms of an IoT play, what do you think the biggest challenge is there with using internet as the backhaul?
I think you hit a lot of the points. For us, you got to think, you step back to this old technology. A lot of it was created before encryption was even really a thing. So as we come on, I was like, we got to make sure we encrypt this stuff. And, that's sometimes a hard process if you don't build it from the ground up. You got to go back in and put those type of coding changes in. And of course, that's money that you're not going to get a return on. So a lot of that stuff, if we didn't have built in like TLS or didn't have built in things, that's where we would look at the VPN type scenarios where we could encapsulate it. We would run LoRaWAN, or we'd run cellular modems, low bandwidth, low battery type systems, modems out there on these collectors and hubs. And basically they would create a VPN when they communicated 2 or 3 times a day, and it would just transfer it over. So everything was it was still over just cell service, but it was very encrypted at that point through our VPN, where now we're building things from the ground up, more strategic, more security, that's where we have more freedom to utilize some of those API security, feature sets, or just basic cloud, security that we could not do at the start.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. It's one thing to be agile in the cloud. It's another thing to try to go update the software stack on a water meter that was built in 1995 and make
Yep.
it hip to internet like that. That's just not going to happen. Or if it does, it's going to cost so much money, be so disruptive that it's
Yep.
just not worth it.
Yep.
There will always be systems out there that need a different level of security. You have to do IPsec. You can't pivot everything. That's especially true in the energy and public sector market, right? I mean, if it's all
Oh, it is.
software, it's a different story. But you guys are very much analog, right? I mean, you're dealing with physical
Yep.
meters. They're
Yep.
probably
Yep.
mechanical. Trying to get those adapted to cloud means you have to build more traditional style networks using an overlay technology, right?
Where on premise, you might have to buy more hardware. Like there's a whole procurement process, waiting, things like that. You're not as agile to really drop and add services like that. We're in the cloud. The nice thing is, I could run a true IPsec backend where we tunnel those things right into a private network and still talk to the same systems that, as we grew, we could expose through API or through, just plain exposure through different services of AWS. So the nice thing about it was the cloud allowed us that freedom to use multiple type of systems, but yet secure it kind of through the same window pane, same glass.
Right.
It might be technically two different segments, two different flows, but at the end, the being able to tie that all into a cloud environment was really nice. And Aviatrix was a big piece of that as well for us.
What do you think the greatest advantage was for your business moving to cloud? I know, we spent, as we kind of do on this show, a lot of the time just talking about nut and bolt challenges. I want to make sure that the listeners understand what it means to take a business that has the heritage and history that your business has and pivot that to cloud. I'm sure it was worth it. Talk to me about the advantages. If you could nail it down to maybe two or three things that have really made a difference in your business, what would they be?
One is the ability to maximize our products in a quick and efficient manner. By that, I mean, if we look at how us as consumers view, we get updates in our camera software, updates in our whatever little SaaS product we use or an app we use. There's all these features, profile, or you can look at all the data, and you can do all these neat things and see all these features of something. Well, what we've allowed at Mueller was before it was a very slow process, ramp time to market, go to market for a feature. Because not only did you have to write the code, write the software, write the GUI, then you had to make sure your back end was good, stable, had all that stuff in place. AWS has allowed us to take and get the most features out of our product quicker. If, for instance, we want to deploy some new feature, now we don't have to go and put new hardware in. We can just launch it and spin up as a service in AWS and work off of that. So I think the ability to really quickly update our product and offer new features is a big thing. But also the data in itself is
Mm.
huge. If you got to think where water technology kind of is winning, we do leak detection, we do pressure monitoring. We can tell, where a leak is precisely without you having to dig up the line. And we're even able now through AWS and through some of these services, like through machine learning, is able to actually predict when a pipe might fail because we've tracked it. We know that it fails every 30 years, every 50 years, every 75 years, or that's got too much pressure coming through it. Now with AWS and through the cloud in general, that machine learning and that data mining and those data lakes, the ability to pull all that data in and quickly use it to then offer the customer features that we could never do. Like, hey, this pipe, we put that in, or this valve is 30 years old, or this hydrant, whatever it is, it's going to break. And we can do it precisely. Pretty powerful.
That is extremely powerful. Yeah, I can see how that would have benefits, not just to customers in your business, but the environment all up, right? Water is your critical resource,
Yep.
finite, especially fresh water. And the amount of water you can save just through that early leak detection and to replace a pipe that you know
Yes.
is going to go faulty before it even breaks. I mean, of course, you're saving the customer the service interruption, but just the amount of water you can save and the environmental impact of that has to be huge.
Absolutely. And it's been huge for us because, like I said, when we can actually ship them the part before it breaks and say, hey, you need to change that. And that first time that they don't do it and it breaks within a week or two of a period when we said it would, they're like, oh, wow. And now instead of having to put crews on reactive, they can put them on proactive. They can say, hey, let's start replacing these because these are going to break first. Even though this one's older, we've had more history in this area so when you can build those patterns and present that in beautiful GUIs and presentation methods to the customer, it really starts to help. And really can't do that without millions and millions of dollars of hardware on premise.
Well, Justin, this has been fantastic. As always, I learned so much on these episodes. I feel like my brain is just exploding with all the cool stuff we've talked about. I mean, I haven't really thought deeply about how cloud can transform a business such as yours and then the benefits that brings. It was also really cool to hear about the challenges you faced and how you overcame them. So thank you so much for your time and being so candid and forthcoming, and would love to get you back on the show. And we'll talk more about how things are going, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about ML and AI. I'd love to learn how that would change your business.
Sure, absolutely. Hey, it's been great with you. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I geek out on this stuff. I love talking about it. It's always changing too. That's the amazing thing. Next time we'll have probably a whole new set of things to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. If you're bored in cloud, just wait a minute. You won't be bored.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. Take care. I appreciate it.